Tsunami wasn't sure how she felt about being treated the same as Anemone, a 1-year-old dragonette, but she did like how her mother kept patting her, as if she wanted to make sure Tsunami was real. As they flew up to the pavilion, Tsunami saw several guards clustered on one of the lowest levels, half of them sleeping, and half of them drinking something steaming out of handheld cauldrons. She noticed that they looked well-fed, well-rested, and content, not thin and grumpy like Queen Scarlet's guards in the Skywing Palace. Proof that my mother is a better queen than Scarlet, Tsunami thought. When Queen Coral landed on the council level, a flurry of wing beats sounded all over the palace. Council members swept down from caves or surged up from the water below. Coral settled herself in the largest pool, which was labeled Queen. She tugged Anemone into the water with her, although it was a bit of a squeeze, and the little dragonette had to curl under the Queen's wing. "Mother," Anemone protested, "quit squashing me." She wriggled around until there was a little more space for her. Small turquoise dragons darted in with platters of food, laying them all around the pools as council members slipped into their places. Tsunami stood awkwardly to the side. She felt like her tail and wings were in the way of everything. "Oh," said Queen Coral, finally noticing. "Tsunami, you can sit there. Tortoise is guarding the hatchery at the Deep Palace, so she won't be joining us today." The Queen pointed her claw at a pool 2 down from hers, labeled Dragonette Care in tiny emeralds. The wet stone was chilly under Tsunami's talons as she climbed into it. The pools on either side of the Queen said Defense and Communication. Shark splashed down in the first one, and a moment later, Moray landed in the other. "Good morning, Your Majesty," Moray said, bowing and dipping her wings. "I know yesterday was a shocking day, but I hope you slept well. I worried about you all night." "Thank you, dear," said the Queen. Her eyes were scanning the rest of the council. Whirlpool flew up beside Moray. His pool was labeled Magic and Publishing. Tsunami tilted her head at him. How did one become an expert in either of those things? What kind of magic did he know anything about? She glanced around, wondering if there was a pool for the king, but she didn't see one. Queen Coral hadn't said anything about Tsunami's father yesterday, and in all the excitement about Kestrel's body, Tsunami hadn't had a chance to ask. Maybe he was at the Deep Palace. Maybe she could meet him later today. She remembered some of the council from the day before. The plump dragon, Lagoon, who'd been sent to feed the other dragonettes, sat in a pool marked Aquaculture. Piranha, the one who'd gone with Shark to examine and dispose of Kestrel's body, was in War. Tsunami didn't know any of the other dragons' names, but from where she sat, she could see the labels Treasury, Justice, and Hunting. She didn't really understand this council business. She wasn't sure what they did or why they were necessary. Wasn't it enough to have a queen? Couldn't Coral just decide everything herself? "That's what I'd do," she thought. "I'll get rid of this council and run the tribe like a proper queen." Maybe it worked for Coral, but Tsunami didn't need or want 11 dragons following her around offering advice all the time. Her stomach rumbled, and she tried to remember when she'd last eaten. The platters around her were loaded with raw ruby-red fish, most of it sliced and deboned, and arranged into fancy rolls with seaweed. She'd only ever eaten fish raw and whole, or sometimes scorched when her friends decided to set their dinner on fire. A few cauldrons held seething mountains of tiny green crabs. 3 large bowls contained some kind of salad of octopus tentacles and herbs that Tsunami had never seen before. She plucked out one of the tentacles and tasted it. It was rubbery but sweet, with a tang like lemons and salt. She reached for another one and realized the whole council was staring at her. Nobody else had started eating yet. Oops. All the council eyes swiveled toward the Queen, who was staring at the bit of octopus in Tsunami's claws. Coral shook herself and smiled. "It's all right," the Queen said, clapping her talons together. "Naturally, I forgive my long-lost daughter any accidental impudence. As we all know, she was raised by barbarians, so she couldn't know any better. I give you all permission to eat. Tsunami crushed the tentacle between her claws. Raised by barbarians? Perhaps it was true, but what a thing to say to Tsunami's future subjects. They'd think of her as the dragon who knew nothing about Sea Wing customs. How would she ever earn their respect with that reputation? Was Coral deliberately making Tsunami look foolish in front of the other dragons? Tsunami studied her mother, while Coral helped herself to the largest pieces of fish and crunched through talonfuls of crabs. She dropped bits of food into Anemone's open mouth as she ate. Maybe not. Maybe Tsunami was seeing problems where there weren't any. But maybe it wouldn't hurt to be a little more careful from now on. Chapter 11. Pearl, report, ordered the Queen, after the dragons had eaten in silence for a while. No change, said the elegant pale green dragon in the treasury pool. All your jewels are safe, as always. No scavengers can get to them, and no dragon would dare to try. Splendid, said Coral. She upended the last of a cauldron of crabs into her mouth. Shark, report. I am concerned about our defenses, snarled the gray-green dragon. He glared at Tsunami. The intruders in our midst are a danger to us. We have no idea whether they might have led others to our palace, or what they might be planning. Now, said the Queen. Those are our guests, not intruders. If my daughter trusts them, then of course I do too. Oh, good, Tsunami said quickly, because I was thinking maybe they could join us for breakfast. I'm sure they're hungry, and if they could see that they're really welcome here. She trailed off as Coral shook her head. Only council members and royalty are allowed at council meetings, darling, Queen Coral said, running one claw along a strand of her pearls. But they certainly won't go hungry. Lagoon, did you make sure they were served an ample breakfast? The turquoise dragon nodded. They can have the rest of this as well. Queen Coral waved her talons at the breakfast leftovers. The same small dragons from before darted up from the kitchen level, collected the platters, and flew down to the cave with them. Tsunami watched over the edge of the pavilion. None of her friends even poked their heads out. Were they sulking in there? Were they still mad at her? Well, she was doing a fine enough job of embarrassing herself. She didn't need them to come out and help. Raised by barbarians, friends with other tribes, not the stuff most queens were made of. Whirlpool, report, said the Queen, smiling at him. Whirlpool touched the hoop in his ear and flared his wings. Anemone's lessons are going wonderfully, he said. Tsunami wasn't sure why his voice was so irritating, but it felt like claws scraping on stone to listen to him. And your scrolls have never been more popular. The latest has been bought by every single Sea Wing in the tribe. Mostly the underwater editions, Moray jumped in. Those tend to sell the best. Of course, I spend all my energy promoting them. But I've organized another reading, Whirlpool interrupted. Every high-ranking dragon is clamoring to attend. We're charging an emerald apiece this time. Queen Coral waved her tail thoughtfully. I want to be sure I'm reaching the eel-eating masses as well, though, she said. I mean, my writing should be shared with everyone, not just those who can afford it. Of course, Moray said. That's why the schools have all changed their curriculums again, to be sure the dragonettes have enough time to read everything you've written. It's the most important subject they study. You can't be serious, Tsunami burst out. More important than how to fight the war? Cold silence. Queen Coral pressed a talon to her chest, looking injured. Darling, my writing is about everything, as you would know if you'd finished the scrolls I gave you yesterday. What did you think of them? Tsunami guiltily remembered the scrolls she'd tossed aside as they flew off to see Kestrel's body. She hadn't even gone back to the library to get them. She mumbled. The missing princess is still my favorite. A chuckle ran around the assembled dragons. Tsunami felt hot with embarrassment. Councils were so stupid. She would never, ever have something like this when she was queen. That reminds me, said the queen. Whirlpool, Tsunami needs lessons in aquatic. Can you believe she never learned it? Poor thing. She tapped her claws on the stone in front of her. Such a sad upbringing. Her face was sympathetic, but her stripes were flashing, and Tsunami wondered angrily if she was saying something different to the council, knowing Tsunami couldn't understand. Of course, Your Majesty, Whirlpool said. He inclined his head towards Tsunami. I would be happy to instruct the princess. Piranha, report. Queen Coral snapped her head around to the war pool. The war commander was so clawed up that she seemed to be more scars than scales. One horn was snapped in half, and several of her teeth were broken. Still no information about the dead Skywing, Piranha growled. Tsunami ducked her head. Eventually, she had to tell her mother the truth, who Kestrel was, how Tsunami knew her. But she didn't want a harness attached to her, or some kind of permanent guard, and she felt like she should tell her friends first. I'll tell her later. I will. A war party returned early this morning, Piranha went on. Do you want to hear their report? Queen Coral sighed and gestured with her claws. Piranha called over the edge, and 2 soldier sea wings came flying up from a lower level. One was too injured to fly, so the other supported him. They spiraled in a jerking, awkward motion and landed heavily in the center of the council meeting. The sea wing who couldn't fly had long burns along his side, and one wing was scorched almost entirely black. Claw marks along his underbelly were still oozing blood, which dripped into the sparkling channels between the council dragons, staining the pearls red. Tsunami saw the queen give her decorated floor a concerned look. The other sea wing had a scorch mark in the middle of his tail and a horrible gash in his neck. He was breathing heavily, and bubbles of pale red blood foamed out of his gills. Let's hear it, Queen Coral ordered. Something strange is happening in the Sky Kingdom, Your Majesty, said the one who couldn't fly. The battalions, it's as if nobody knows who's in charge. We were patrolling the outer islands, and we were attacked by 3 separate wings. The first squadron was half sky wings and half sand wings. During the second attack, we heard the sky wings yelling, "For Ruby!" And in the third, at least one dragon shouted, "The queen is not dead. Long live the queen!" Queen Coral sat forward, splashing water over the edge of the pool and squashing Anemone over to the side. "For Ruby?" she echoed. One of Scarlet's daughters, growled Piranha. Does that mean Queen Scarlet is dead? Tsunami clenched and unclenched her talons. How much should she tell the council? She didn't want to reveal Glory's secret weapon. They never knew when they might need it. And they weren't even sure Glory had killed Queen Scarlet during the escape. We would have heard if there had been a challenge, surely, said Moray. Queen Coral shot a stern look at the blue dragon in the secrets and spies pool. Why don't you know anything about this? None of my spies have reported in for days, he protested. I had no idea anything strange was happening in the Sky Kingdom. The soldier who couldn't fly was leaning more and more dizzily against his companion. Puddles of blood soaked their claws. Mother, Tsunami said, shouldn't somebody look at their injuries? She pointed at the soldiers. Coral eyed them up and down. Anything else to report? 12 casualties, the soldier croaked. All the rest badly injured. But nobody followed you back to the palace, demanded Shark. We were careful, he promised, wincing with pain. We took the longest routes back. Very well. Queen Coral waved her talons dismissively. You may go. She flicked her tail at the smallest council member in the dragon health pool, who ushered the soldiers away. Moray immediately jumped out of her own pool and started cleaning up the blood on the floor.
If there is chaos in the Sky Kingdom, maybe this is the time to strike, Coral said. She wrapped one strand of pearls around her claws. We should send the rescue mission now. We could get him back today.
We don't know enough, growled the Secrets and Spies dragon. If Scarlet is dead, how did she die? Did Ruby kill her? Or is she fighting with her sisters for the throne?
Moray hissed at the blood under her claws.
Like the Sandwing rivalry all over again, making the war even worse.
Or has Byrne taken over? Piranha suggested. She would, if she was there.
But Scarlet's daughters might not listen to Byrne the way Scarlet did, said Moray.
What could have happened? Coral said. Queen Scarlet was so strong.
Tsunami shifted uncomfortably, feeling the cold water seeping through her scales. She couldn't hide what she knew, not when her mother needed the information so much. Or at least she could share some of the dramatic highlights. Tsunami said. The entire council turned to stare at her. That might have been us.
There was a shocked pause.
You, barked Piranha.
Ridiculous, snarled Shark.
Queen Scarlet found us under the mountain, Tsunami said. She held us prisoner in her palace, and when we escaped, we sort of might have killed her. Maybe. I'm not sure. I will say we tried. She quite liked the horrified look on Shark's face at that bit of news. Starting to respect us a bit more, she thought.
You were at the Skywing Palace?
Coral lunged out of her pool, swarmed across the stone, and seized Tsunami's front talons in her own, clutching them so hard it was a little painful. Behind her, Anemone was yanked half out of the pool with a squeak of protest, but Coral didn't seem to notice.
Did you see a sea-wing named Gil? The Queen cried. Green scales, big and powerful with brave eyes.
Tsunami felt sick. Gil. Yes, she remembered Gil, but not the way Queen Coral described him. She'd been forced to fight Gil in Scarlet's gladiator arena after he'd been deprived of water for months and driven mad with thirst. He'd been covered in scratches, as if he'd tried to drink his own blood. The sound of dragon bones snapping between my talons. I did see him, Tsunami said slowly. A gasp went up around her, whispers traveling from one council member to the next. Shark's pale, unfriendly eyes were like octopus arms coiling around her neck.
Can you tell us where he is? Queen Coral asked urgently. We've been planning a rescue mission, but he's not in the regular prison with the others, and we've got to get him back, Tsunami. You have no idea how important it is.
Tsunami curled her tail in close to her talons. She wanted to dive into the lake, crawl down to the bottom, and stay there forever with her wings over her head. Her voice cracked. She swallowed and started again. He's dead. She'd had no choice but to kill the desperate sea-wing in the arena. It was his life or hers. She hadn't wanted to kill him. At least, she was pretty sure she hadn't wanted to kill him. But when she did, the truth was, Tsunami had loved the look on Queen Scarlet's face when she broke Gil's neck. She liked the feeling of being powerful and dangerous. Gil's sanity had been long gone anyway. It had been easy for Tsunami not to think about where he came from or what his life was like before he landed in the Skywing prison. It was easier not to think of him as a real dragon. She'd never imagined her own mother desperately planning to get him back, or that she'd have to explain his death to anyone.
Dead?
Queen Coral released Tsunami's talons and staggered backward. Her claws splashed in the winding channels, slipping on pearls.
How?
Tsunami stammered. Did she really have to admit this in front of all these dragons? In the arena.
But he refused to fight, Coral said. We heard about it through our spies. He convinced each of his opponents to lie down and refuse to fight along with him. He has had a way with words. No one who met him would be able to kill him."
A smile flickered across her snout and vanished.
Queen Scarlet was furious, I heard.
She was. Tsunami swallowed again. She punished him. It was really awful.
What do you know about his death? Shark demanded coldly.
Tsunami stirred the water with her claws. She drove him mad. She kept him away from water until he lost his mind, and when he was crazy, he was dangerous. He was barely even a dragon anymore. He had to be killed.
Really?
Shark said, and Tsunami felt horribly sure he had guessed the truth. Why? Tsunami asked. Who was he? An important general?
More than that, said Queen Coral in a hollow voice. Much more. He was my husband.
Darkness seemed to be rushing into Tsunami's vision, sucking away all her breath. She knew what Queen Coral was going to say next, and she would have fled back to the mountains to avoid hearing it if she could.
Tsunami, Gil was your father.
Chapter 12. Queen Coral dropped her head and slowly dragged herself back to her pool.
Dead,
she said.
My Gil is dead.
No more eggs, Maury whispered. She was still crouched in the center of the floor, scrubbing at the blood. Her eyes had a weird glow to them. No more dragonettes, no more challenges.
Not necessarily. She could marry again,
Whirlpool murmured. Moray shot him a glare. Coral didn't seem to hear either of them. She pulled Anemone into her wings and clutched her tightly. The little dragonette wriggled a bit, then gave up and rested her head on Coral's shoulder. She blinked in a resigned way at Tsunami over their mother's back. Tsunami felt like oceans were pressing against the back of her eyes. Her scales were heavy, as if they were clogged with seaweed. But I didn't have a choice. Did I? He was my father, and I had no idea. But he wasn't a real dragon anymore. He wasn't anyone inside his parched scales. He was gone, and I had to survive. I had to survive to protect my friends and fulfill my destiny. Nothing helped. She hadn't really thought about other options when she'd killed the Seawing in the arena. It was impulse, and wanting to prove something to Queen Scarlet. Shark was still staring at her, unblinking. Tsunami bared her teeth at him.
I must grieve, said the Queen. Council dismissed.
She stepped to the edge of the pavilion and flew off to her cave, still holding Anemone. The council dragons peeled off to various caves and other levels of the pavilion. Tsunami buried her head in the pool and clutched her horns. Now what was she supposed to do? She definitely was not in the mood for seeing her friends. It would not make her feel any better to face their remarks about what a terrible dragon she was. The kind of dragon who attacked other dragons for no reason. The kind of dragon who did what she thought was right, but was always wrong. The kind of dragon who could kill her own father. Something tapped her on the top of her head. She emerged from the water and found Whirlpool rubbing his claws together.
Time for your first lesson, he said in his oily voice.
Now? Tsunami said.
Why not?
He spread his talons.
It is never too soon to begin filling our minds with knowledge.
Tsunami hissed softly under her breath. This was not going to be fun, but perhaps it would be distracting.
Come,
he said, strutting to the edge and diving over. Tsunami reluctantly followed him into the cavern lake. He was hovering several lengths below the surface, flashing his stripes at her. Tsunami sank to his level and watched him. She kept her own scales dark. She most definitely did not want to say something to him like what she'd said to Riptide. If Anemone was right about Coral's plans for him, Whirlpool did not need any encouraging. After a few moments, Whirlpool swam up to the surface again. His pale green eyes seemed far too big for his eye sockets.
"What's the matter?" he said. "Don't your stripes light up?"
"Of course they do," Tsunami snapped. "But you haven't told me what we're saying or anything."
"Just imitate me," he said officiously, and dove again before she could argue. "Rrrr,"
Tsunami growled. This time she imitated each flashing path of light, along her wings, her tail, her sides, alternating and sometimes flashing faster or slower. It seemed to go on for an eternity. Finally, Whirlpool nodded with satisfaction and rose to the air again.
"Excellent," he proclaimed.
"What's excellent?" Tsunami demanded, spreading her wings to float. "What did we just say?"
"We recited the first chapter of the Queen's very first work, The Tragedy of Orca. It's extremely moving, glorious writing. You nearly repeated it perfectly."
Tsunami wanted to splash seawater up his annoying snout. "But I didn't learn anything."
"Oh, you will," he said. "With repetition comes perfection. Shall we go on to the second chapter?"
"No," Tsunami said. "Teach me something I can use. How do you greet strangers? How do you warn other sea wings of danger? How do you say, 'I'm sorry I killed my father'?" She shook herself. "For moon's sake, at least show me how to say I don't speak aquatic."
"All knowledge can be found in the Queen's writing," Whirlpool insisted. "If we recite 3 chapters a day, we should get through her entire body of work in about 5 years.
"I have to get out of here," Tsunami said, "before I tie your stupid tail around your stupid snout and leave you in a bundle at the bottom of the lake." She turned and swam toward the exit tunnel. It wasn't quite as dramatic as storming out of a cave, which she hoped would be the first and last time she missed anything about life under the mountain.
"I am not impressed with your work ethic," Whirlpool called. "This may take us closer to 7 or 8 years if you—"
Tsunami plunged her head under the water so she wouldn't have to listen to him anymore. The exit tunnel yawned ahead of her, and she shot into it as fast as her wings could beat. Outside the summer palace, the sky was gray and overcast, which suited Tsunami's mood perfectly. Wind whipped the sea into white-tipped peaks, knocking Tsunami around even more than usual. She tried paddling away from the palace underwater, but currents kept flinging her into the jagged boulders. She was sick of fighting with the ocean. Why wouldn't it welcome her like it was supposed to? Why couldn't she start over as a normal sea wing with normal problems, instead of having her past mistakes suckered onto her tail like overgrown leeches? Frustrated, she swam to the surface and flew into the sky. It didn't make sense that flying should be easier for her than swimming. What kind of sea wing didn't love the sea? The kind that shouldn't be queen, maybe, Tsunami thought. Looming out of the water ahead of her was the island of rocks shaped like a giant dragon skeleton. Tsunami banked toward it, studying the holes and gaps. She chose the cave where the eye should be and landed in cool semi-darkness. The stone was smooth like pearls under her claws. She flapped her wings to dry them and turned to look out the entrance. A dragon head popped into her view, then vanished again. "Wow," Tsunami said. "You are the worst at staying hidden. Has anyone ever told you that you should definitely never be a spy?" Riptide slowly poked his head around the mouth of the cave.
"I think I'd make a splendid spy," he said with dignity.
"Aren't you supposed to be patrolling the outer islands where we met?" Tsunami asked.
"Perhaps, but as you can imagine, I don't have a very important job,"
Riptide made a wry expression.
Her Majesty can't trust me with anything vital.
You do seem like a shady character, Tsunami said, remembering that she was supposed to be mad at him too. She could yell at him. Her first instinct was to yell at him. Maybe I should stop listening to all my first instincts. She scooted back farther into the cave. Come on in. I'm just recovering from an aquatic lesson with Whirlpool.
Oh, Whirlpool. Queen Coral's favorite instrument of torture,
Riptide said. He climbed into the cave beside her, shaking water droplets from his scales. The cave was only big enough for 3 or 4 dragons, so they were closer together in the dark than Tsunami had expected. When she was much younger, Tsunami had had fleeting crushes on Clay and Starflight before she realized that Starflight could be massively annoying and that sweet, loyal Clay saw the other dragonettes as brothers and sisters. But they were the only dragonettes her own age that she'd ever met. Even though they weren't sea wings, who else was she supposed to like? Now here she was, alone with a sea wing who looked at her as if he didn't see a future queen, or a father killer, or anything but a dragon whom he liked very much. Coral told me Webbs is your father, she said quickly, awkwardly. Why didn't you say something when we met?
It's not how I usually introduce myself, he said. He coiled his tail around his talons. It makes dragons see me a certain way. I'm sorry, I should have told you. I was hoping you might, I'd like to know more about him.
Tsunami shook her head, tempted to say, no, you wouldn't. Is that why you've been hanging around watching me? She asked instead. His dark blue eyes caught the faint light from outside.
That and other reasons, he said. I was worried about you. There aren't a lot of outspoken dragons in the Kingdom of the Sea.
I can say whatever I want, Tsunami said boldly. I'm the missing princess. Mother loves me so much, she'll have a harness on me by the end of the day if I'm not careful.
Riptide snorted. I'd like to see any dragon try to put a harness on you.
Then they'd really find out how outspoken I am, Tsunami said. She opened and closed her wings, accidentally brushing against his. Oops, say something, quick. Webbs wasn't so bad, she blurted. Not as bad as the other 2. He tilted his head. We had 3 guardians. The other 2, Dune and Kestrel, hated everything, Tsunami said. Except maybe Sunny. Nobody hates Sunny. She's too sweet and simple and lovable.
She sounds frightful,
Riptide said, and Tsunami laughed. But Webbs? He wasn't just trying to keep us alive. He taught us everything he could, except aquatic, I guess. He taught us history and geography and all about the prophecy, and he wasn't even that boring about it. When it was his turn to hunt, he tried to bring back prey he knew we liked. It would have been worse without him. She fell silent, thinking. She'd never tried listing good things about Webbs before. It was a lot harder than complaining about him, like she'd done her whole life.
It's all right, Riptide said. You can tell me the truth.
The end of his tail flicked up and down.
I want to hear the bad stuff too. It's good for me.
Tsunami took a deep breath. He should have protected us better, she said. If he was the only one who cared, he should have stopped Dune and Kestrel from hurting us and telling us we were worthless. He should have fought for us, and he never did, except right at the end, when Scarlet and the Skywings attacked. That's one thing I do, she thought to herself. I fight for my friends, even if I'm doing it all wrong. Riptide nodded, looking down at the stone under his talons.
Weak and cowardly, he said. That's how he's always been described to me.
Tsunami reached out and touched his wing with one claw. That doesn't mean you're anything like him, she said. It's not fair to punish you for what he did. Something tingled in the air between them, like the sky outside, waiting for the storm. This is most improper for the future Sea Wing Queen, Tsunami thought. But maybe I'd rather have this than a throne anyway.
Would you like a real aquatic lesson? Riptide asked with a smile.
I demand one, she answered.
It's dark enough in here, he said. All right, here's what you say to Whirlpool next time you see him.
The stripe on his tail lit up 3 times. Uh-oh, Tsunami said, copying him. What did I just call him?
A squid brain, Riptide said. My new favorite insult, thanks to you.
I'm not sure this lesson is teaching me much more than his did, Tsunami pointed out.
Hey, now I'm offended, he said. All right, you asked for it.
He sat down and pointed to his snout.
These stripes usually indicate a question, like this for why, and like this for how, and like this for when.
Tsunami mimicked him, memorizing the patterns of flashes. It was easier than she'd expected. Maybe there was one part of being a sea wing that she wouldn't be a total failure at. After she had the question patterns down, Riptide said,
Try this one. I will protect you.
Stripes flashed along his side, and he gestured at the same time. I don't need protecting, Tsunami said.
I know, he answered, but knowing you, you'll probably need to say it to someone one day.
Tsunami liked that. I will protect you, she echoed, flashing it back at him. He smiled a little sadly.
I wish you could, he said.
Why not? She said. I am a princess. I can do whatever I want.
Not while someone else is queen, he pointed out. All right, here's how you indicate different kinds of danger.
Riptide showed her other stripe patterns and some of the talon gestures as well. It was all fascinating, and Tsunami wasn't sure how much time had passed when she finally glanced out at the wind-whipped sea and realized she should be getting back. Mother might be looking for me, she explained. But thank you. You have no idea how helpful this was. All of this, she thought, realizing she'd managed to forget about Gil for a little while.
Has Blister arrived yet?
Riptide asked. Tsunami shook her head. He took her front talons in his.
Be wary of her, he said.
She has her own plans, and I don't think protecting sea wings is high on her list.
I will, Tsunami said. Oh, she added, freeing her talons. What does this mean? She tried to imitate the circular gesture Shark had made yesterday. Riptide tilted his head at her.
If you mean this, he said, doing it perfectly, then it means something like, not right now, we'll finish this later.
Tsunami stared at him. Are you sure?
Pretty sure,
Riptide said.
Why? Who?
Yesterday, when I stopped Shark and the guards from killing my friends, Tsunami said, jumping to her feet. That's the gesture he made to them. You're telling me he was saying, we'll just kill them later? Riptide rubbed his snout.
Maybe,
he said unhappily.
But if Queen Coral hasn't ordered it, then I'm sure.
How would I know? Tsunami cried. What if she has ordered it and I didn't understand her? She ran to the mouth of the cave. I have to go back. I have to check on them. I haven't even seen them since yesterday. She leaped into the air, catching the air currents.
Be careful,
Riptide called after her.
I'll be out here if you need me. Just...
The wind yanked away his last words. Tsunami dove into the water, between the spiral dragonhorn rocks. She powered through the kelp into the tunnel, shooting between the rock walls. She was going so fast, she didn't see the dark shape waiting above her in one of the breathing holes. She thought she was alone, until talons slammed into her back, and sharp claws closed around her neck. Chapter 13. Giant wings smashed Tsunami to the rock floor of the tunnel. She tried to twist around, but her attacker kicked her in the head and then shoved a hood that smelled of seaweed over her snout so she couldn't see. Tsunami shouted and struggled, lashing out with her claws and tail. Her attacker was bigger than her and heavier, so Tsunami could barely move under the weight. It seemed like he or she was wearing something to make them heavier. She felt something metallic clank against her spines. Fishhook claws dug into her gills, and Tsunami shrieked with pain. She felt blood swirling away from her neck into the water. I'm not going to die here, she thought ferociously. Killed by a coward I can't even see. I don't think so. She remembered how Sunny always managed to wriggle free during their battle training sessions. The tiny dragonette used her small size to slip out of almost every hold Tsunami could think of. Tsunami scrunched her legs and wings in close and ducked her head, rolling into a tight, spiky ball. Her attacker's grip loosened around her neck, and, as the dragon fumbled for Tsunami's snout, Tsunami was able to squirm down and shove her opponent over her head. A blast of bubbles slammed into her as the dragon crashed into the wall. Before she could pull her hood off, the talons were back, clutching her forearms. Tsunami kicked viciously at the underbelly that had to be in front of her and felt her claws snag painfully on metal rings. Her attacker made no sound, but a moment later, the dragon's tail hit Tsunami so hard she thought she heard bones crack. The other dragon's wings began to press her down toward the rock floor again. Whoever it was knew how to fight like a sea wing. They had all the advantages of this world. So use something they haven't seen before. Tsunami thought of how Glory used distraction whenever she fought Kestrel. Tsunami's scales couldn't change color, but she bet she could still be pretty distracting. She flared her wings open and closed, as fast as she could, stirring up the water around them. She felt her attacker pause, as if confused. On her third flare open, Tsunami suddenly lit up all the stripes all over her body in what she hoped was a blinding flash. Her attacker's talons slipped, and Tsunami struck out with her claws again. Again, she flared her stripes, as bright as she could make them, so she could even see the light through her hood. She reached to shove her attacker away, and suddenly, whoever it was gone. Tsunami flailed in the water for a moment, fending off the attacks she expected from every side, before she realized there was no one around her anymore. She reached up and yanked off the hood, then felt the movement of somebody coming up the tunnel from the outside. She whirled around, ready to fight, and Riptide leaped back, waving his talons. Tsunami whipped her head back and forth, but there was no sign of anyone else. All right, Riptide signaled. Who? She signaled back with the stripes on her snout. Who? She didn't have any of the other words she needed. He spread his webbed claws. I don't know. Then he pointed at her. All right? He lit up all his stripes, and she guessed he'd seen the light from outside. She nodded impatiently. She didn't have any way to explain that she was grateful he'd come, but she needed to chase down her attacker now. All right, she signaled back. Then she spun away, swimming fast down the tunnel toward the palace. Tsunami burst out of the water into a scene of eerie calm. Dragons were lounging peacefully on beaches and cliff edges, or playing underwater and darting through the waterfalls. She searched the water and the pavilion with her gaze, looking for anyone who might have just been in a fight. Surely she had left some kind of mark on her attacker. No one was acting suspicious. Tsunami glanced up and saw her mother's tail poking off a level of the pavilion near the top, the library level. She beat her wings, rose out of the water and flew up to her. Hello, dear, Queen Coral said as Tsunami landed. She was surrounded by scrolls, several of them half unrolled. Anemone was curled on a curved white boulder beside her, looking bored out of her mind. I've been reading out loud to your sister. It's her favorite part of the day. We've just finished the story of how I chose Gil to be my husband. She sighed gustily. He adored my writing too. Mother, Tsunami started. He was a perfect candidate for king, Coral said. He came from a very noble family. Nothing to worry about in his ancestry. A lot like Whirlpool in his intelligence, too. Coral sighed again. Mother, Tsunami said again. Luckily, you've arrived just in time for my epic poem on the differences between oysters and clams. It's an elegantly well-crafted metaphor about class differences and genetic superiority,
as Whirlpool always says. Mother, Tsunami interrupted firmly. Someone just tried to kill me.
Queen Coral sat up, scattering drops of ink from her claws.
What? Who dared?
I don't know, but they must be here now, Tsunami said. Somewhere in the palace. We should gather everyone and—
The eggs! Queen Coral yelped. The eggs must be in danger.
She started flinging scrolls back into cauldrons.
What?
Tsunami said, bewildered.
What eggs?
2 eggs with female dragonettes,
Anemone explained to Tsunami.
They're in the royal hatchery, in the deep palace. They're due to hatch in a couple of days.
And if someone attacked you, they'll